Hi, welcome to the dunkelgrün channel. My name is Anna. I am coming to you from Zurich in Switzerland. You can also find me on Instagram as @dunkelgrün and on Ravelry as dunkelgrün. In today's episode, I'm going to give you an update on my knitting projects. We have a new kind of craft that I have been dabbling into in the last couple of weeks, tablet weaving. And also we're going to have a Q&A session where I answer questions that you guys have been asking me over in my Instagram stories. So yes, there is another episode after the last one. Thank you all so much for welcoming back with such kind words. It has just shown me one more time how awesome the knitting community is, because everyone had such beautiful and nice things to say. And thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for all of this. And I was also really excited to see that there are still so many people around who are interested to see the podcast, and it gave me a lot of motivation also to keep going. As I already said last time, my podcast is not going to come out every week. I think I might do something like every month, but also without any pressure. Maybe sometimes it will be 5 or 6 weeks between episodes. So let's get started with today's episode. I don't have any finished projects, and I was also not going to pull out anything from what I have been knitting over the last couple of years that you have not seen yet. We might do that again in the next video, but maybe you are wondering what I am wearing here. The sweater is one that I have already introduced in a previous episode. That was episode 15. I will link it here, so if you want to know all about this sweater, you can check out that episode. And now let's move on to what's on my needles. So the first project that is on my needles is a hat that I have cast on. At the moment we are just here at the ribbing. I cast on 96 stitches on 3.5 millimeter double pointed needles. There is not really a pattern for this project. I am coming up with it as I go. The first thing that I want to have is a long ribbing which then can be folded up so that it's then a folded brim, and then I want to do a cable pattern, probably a very simple like 4x4 cables all around, very simple one. Actually, I made a little bit of a mistake with this project because I wanted to cast on something that is nice and portable, that I can put in my backpack and knit in the public transport. But when I chose the yarn, I made a bit of a mistake of thinking. I chose this cone yarn here, which I got in Edinburgh 2 years ago. And this is Ardalanish natural Aran in the Manx color. It is undyed natural color of the sheep, and I really like this natural wool color. Actually, I have knitted a cardigan out of this yarn already because I had 2 cones initially, and maybe this cardigan I'm going to show you in the next episode or so. Let's see. So there's not much to say about this project at the moment, so let's move on to the next one. The next project that is on my needles is actually not really on my needles, but it's also not finished, is my Maya cardigan. This is where we are at the moment. I have finished the yoke and the neckline since last time, and as most of you have recommended, or actually I think everybody has recommended, I knit the body a bit longer. The next steps for this project is going to be to block it, so give it a nice soak in water and squeeze out the water and then let it dry flat. And then I'm going to do the so-called steeking, which is to cut open the front. you can see here that there is a line in the middle in the color work pattern which indicates me the center of the cardigan, and this is where we are going to do the cutting. This project, really highly recommended. The pattern is by Helene Magnussen or Järbo yarn. It's a free pattern. Really nice that they offer this as a free pattern, and I am really enjoying this knit because it's the perfect balance between color work and I don't know, I really like it, and the design is just really lovely. The yarn that I used for this project is Letlopi in these 4 colors. The rust color is the one that the original pattern uses as well. All the others I have kind of substituted a bit. You can find the information if you follow the link to the project in the description. So I have decided to not post a show note blog post anymore on my website dunkelgrün.com, but I am going to link in the description here on YouTube. I'm going to link to the project on Ravelry, and there you find all the information like the colorway numbers, the link to the pattern, and so on. The same goes for the needles, which I think almost never mention in my podcast. I used these Lykke wooden needles for this particular project. I am pretty much a wooden needle girl. I don't knit so much with metal needles. Yeah, I think all the needles that I have are wooden. One thing that people typically do when they do steeking is that this raw edge that is created by the cutting is hidden underneath a band or a ribbon. And I was looking a bit into such ribbons. I tried to find some from Etsy. I have actually ordered some that looked very nice on the pictures, but I was not satisfied with their quality. They were very like synthetic fiber, and I don't know, I'm not going to show them here. I'm also not going to name the Etsy shop. They were not like what I expected and what I would want to combine with such a nice woolly wool sweater. So I have been thinking about alternatives. And then actually a dear co-worker of mine, not going to name her because she does not want that, but she took a course in tablet weaving here in Switzerland. And of course I wanted to know everything about it, but initially I did not think that it would be something for me because I thought I would have no use for such bands or ribbons. I mean, I like crafts that in the end I produce also something that I have a use for. Well, this is probably a bit of an exaggeration because I make a lot of stuff that don't have a use, but yeah. Yeah, when I realized that it's actually quite simple, well, it is a bit challenging, but you don't need so much equipment or anything. So I thought I should give that a try and make some tablet weaving cards. My boyfriend made me a kind of loom, and I started out. The first ribbon that I produced is this one here. I don't even know which is the front and which is the back side. I guess this is the front. I have to say that with this tablet I made a couple of mistakes. I did not do the threading correctly and the setup correctly, so the pattern did not come out as I actually initially planned it to, but I don't mind. It is a cute band nonetheless, and it was my first try. And this one I made out of sock yarn. The dark green one is one that I hand dyed, and the white one is an undyed one. For my second band, I got the hang of how to thread these tablets and how to set up for the weaving, and I actually used some DK weight yarn because I wanted it a bit broader, and this is the result. This is the ribbon that came out of the second attempt. It is a bit irregular, you can see that. It has some areas that are a bit thicker, some areas that are a bit thinner. It has some pattern mistakes in it. And here at the very end, where I did just a very simple turn pattern, I think that it finally got the look that I was hoping for. And I must say the thing that I did wrong in the beginning also is that I pulled through the weft thread much too tightly. So after this band, I think I could nail down all of my issues and figure out what had been going wrong. And so the third band that I made after learning from my mistakes from the first two is this one, and I think I really got the hang of it this time. It turned out really nicely. So it's actually two bands that I made separately, but they are with the same pattern. So this is the pattern on the front, and on the back it is slightly different. It looks like this. Also quite nice, I think. And now my goal with these two ribbons, of course, is to cover up the sticks in this cardigan once it is sticked, and I think they fit pretty well. And they're a little bit different, but they're only going to be visible on the inside, so when the cardigan flaps open a little bit, I think it is going to be pretty nice. And the stick and the installing of these ribbons is what you are probably going to see in the next episode. But for this episode, I have prepared a little compilation of my tablet weaving adventure, which you are going to see now. The first thing I did was making my own cards. The next step was to prepare the yarn for the warp. And then threading these warp yarns through the tablets. This was probably the most difficult part for me because there are several things to watch out for, and the correct threading is really important so that the pattern comes out as intended. And now, before we can start weaving, we need to wrap the weft yarn around the shuttle. And now you can watch me weave. This process is really quite meditative, and it consists of passing the weft yarn back and forth and rotating the tablets forwards or backwards in between each pass. you want to see my whole process from making the cards to the final woven band, I am going to upload a separate video where I'm going to document this process in detail, and I'm going to probably upload it a week after this podcast episode. And once it is out, I'm going to link it maybe here, maybe in the description or in the first comment, so you are going to find it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you will never miss when new videos come out. And for the last segment of this episode, we are going to have a Q&A, questions and answers. I have opened up a thread where people could ask me questions over on my Instagram stories, and a couple of questions came in and we are now going to answer those. So first questions are going to be knitting or fiber science related, and then in the second half I'm going to answer some questions that are a bit more personal, that have not so much to do with knitting. So thank you everyone who submitted questions, and to those of you who would like to ask questions in the future, head on over to Instagram and follow me there so you don't miss if there's another poll. The first question is, will you bring back fiber science videos? I loved those. Thank you very much. Yes, I totally think I'm going to bring back fiber science videos. At the moment, as I said, I'm taking it a bit slow, but as soon as I come up with some topics, maybe the first one could be the structure of wool. I think I never did that one, even though I would have some content. Yeah, let's see what the next couple of weeks bring, but I think I will bring back those videos at some point. What is your favorite yarn base to work with? Difficult to say. I mean, it depends on what for, I guess, very much. For knitting right now, my absolute favorite yarn is the Let Look Be. I think as I talk quite a lot about it in the last episode, because it's such a nice, light, airy, fluffy, warm yarn that works so well in color work. When it comes to dyeing, I think my organic merino DK base that I get from a spinning mill here in Switzerland is really a very nice one, because it is superwash, so it works quite well for dyeing, but it is not the Hercoset or the standard superwash treatment. It's actually an alternative superwash treatment. If you want to hear more about this, there's also a video where I talk a lot about this in a podcast episode that I'm going to link here. Can you explain the difference between color fast and light fast in botanical dyeing? Yes, I guess I can. The difference between color fast and light fast. So both of these terms have to do with yarns that have been dyed, no matter if with natural dyes or with synthetic dyes. They lose the color over time, so the color fades out eventually. And this happens more or less depending on the dye and the fiber that it is attached to. And the term color fast has to do with how well the dye actually sticks to the fiber. So is there a good chemical or ionic bond between the fiber and the dye? That means they stay together no matter what. If this bond is not so good, then maybe it is going to be washed out if it gets in touch with soap or wool wash or something like that. And the term light fast actually does not tell us anything about the bond between the fiber and the dye. It can be a very strong bond forever. There is no forever in chemistry, but it can be a very strong bond and still fade, because this dye doesn't do well with the illumination with UV light. And that is actually really, really common, because the way that colors work and dyes is that they interact with the light that comes from the sun or from the lamps or whatever light source there is, but usually it is the sunlight, and the UV light portion of the sunlight is the one with the highest energy, the one that is the most aggressive, so to say. And we know it also that it can damage our skin, or it can age plastics, or lots of things that UV light interacts with get like a reaction from that. And the same is true for many dye molecules. When UV light hits them, they get activated, and then the relaxation process is one where the molecule decomposes. So that means the UV light actually destroys the dye, and dyes that have this property are not very light fast, because the longer the dyed fabric or yarn is exposed to sunlight, the more it's going to fade. And the color fast property is more happening when you wash it, or not related to the sun. Hey, here is Editing Anna, and I have something to add to this. Technically, color fastness is an umbrella term that includes light fastness, wash fastness, and rub fastness, which are all concepts that relate to how well the color persists in a dyed fabric or material. Often when we talk about wool dyeing, we often use the word color fastness as a synonym of wash fastness, which I also did here in my explanations. But technically that is not correct, so keep that in mind. Which wool do you prefer to dye? I think this was answered with the previous question. I really like the organic merino decay. How much does the striped sweater weigh? The sweater that I showed in the previous episode. I don't have a scale with me here right now, but I'm going to weigh it and put it up here on the screen. I suppose that it is pretty light because it's fingering weight yarn, and it's very fluffy, airy yarn, so probably half a kilo is what I guess. Let's see what the real answer is. What is the best natural dye that produces the color green? Very cool question. I love it. Actually, so many natural dyes make green or some version of green, but most of them are a bit of an olivey brownish green, which I love, but not everybody does. For me, my favorite way of making green with natural dyes is to use yellow, which you can also create with many different natural dyes, and then over dye it with indigo. I think this gives very nice spectrum of colors. I can put on some pictures of some skeins here that have been dyed that way, first with either onion skins or birch leaves, and then over dyed with indigo. And now we have 3 more questions that are a bit more about my person rather than about knitting, except for maybe the first one. How did I get into knitting? This is probably a long story, because knitting has been present in my life ever since I can think of, but I have not always actively knitted. So I grew up in Austria with my mom, and my grandma lived in the same household, and they were both knitters. And also our neighbor at that time had sheep, and she shore her sheep herself, washed the wool, carded it, and she also had a spinning wheel and spun the wool, and she did some felting and stuff like this. So I was already kind of exposed to that as a child. She also did a lot of natural dyeing, I think, and my mom also did natural dyeing, but more with silks and fabrics that she used for the babies, my younger siblings. And yeah, knitting itself I actually learned both from my mom and also in school. So we have knitting in primary school in Austria, and I did not really like it very much because I was frustrated that it was not so good, and my tiny children hands were not able to do everything properly, so I didn't love it. I had several attempts though at restarting it because I think I kind of wanted to impress my mom and my grandma with it. That was my motivation a lot of times when I picked up needles and yarn. I wanted to satisfy them. I think I have a picture somewhere of like 13-year-old me with a set of plastic needles, very focused face, I can show that here. And then when I really started knitting was after I have moved to Zurich and I started university. And the first thing that I really wanted to make was a pair of socks, which was quite ambitious. And I remember that I cast it on by myself. I started with the ribbing, and at that time I used to go back to Austria every weekend to visit my mom and my family. And as soon as I dropped a stitch, I had to stop knitting for the whole week and bring this piece back to my mom so that she could pick up the stitch for me. And actually I still have this pair of socks. It is this one here. You can see that the foot, no, not the foot, the leg of the sock is all ribbing. This is how my mom and my grandma would have always knit socks. They always put ribbing on the whole leg and then made a heel flap and turn and the foot. And I think this was my first one, the sock that I made. You can see a bit of the irregularity of the stitches in this ribbing. And the heel flap and turn I made together with my mom with her close instructions. And actually the second sock I never finished, and my mom finished it for me. I gave her the yarn and she knitted it for me. Yeah, it took me a long time. I was very slow in fingering weight yarn. Yeah, so it's kind of my first real project that really produced something, but I also didn't really finish it myself. And then I knitted a couple of other small projects, which I don't have anymore. One was a set of leg warmers. I knitted a hat for the boyfriend that I had at that time. Then at some point, when it really started to kick off my knitting was when I discovered Ravelry, and also with spinning, because on Ravelry I discovered that people knit with their own hand spun, and this really intrigued me. When I started spinning and dyeing, I started to be hooked. So this pair of socks was probably finished 15 years ago, in like 2007, I would say, yeah. Next question, which languages do you speak? Good question. My native language is a dialect of German, which is Vorarlbergerisch, which is an Alemannic dialect that we speak in the very west of Austria. It's not the same as Swiss German, but it is similar. And then of course I speak High German, normal German, which is the language that we read and write in. English is my second language. And then in school I also learned French and Latin. At the time I finished high school, I was quite good at French, but I have lost a lot of it. So I can still communicate if I am in a French-speaking region, but I am a bit awkward speaking French. Then I also had in school a little bit of Russian, but I forgot everything except for maybe the alphabet and some very basic words, because it's a really hard language and I never used it. Then what I actually consider my third language is Swedish, because I took it in the university and I have some friends in Sweden that I used to visit as a student, and then I have been to Sweden a couple of times, and since it's a bit of a mix between German and English, it was a language that kind of was approachable to me, so I got the hang of it quite easily. And then I guess my next language that I speak pretty well, that I have started learning 8-9 years ago, is Portuguese, because my partner is actually from Brazil. I met him in Brazil and then he moved here to Switzerland a couple of years ago to be with me, and his native language is Portuguese. So yeah, I guess when it comes down to be really fluent, I think I'm fluent in 4 languages, plus a little bit in French, 4.5, I would say. How did it come that I moved to Switzerland? Very simple. I went to study at the university, and actually I am half Swiss. My dad is Swiss, and so I was born with both the Austrian and the Swiss citizenship. I just still consider myself more Austrian because I grew up and went to school there and I speak the dialect of there. So even after living in Switzerland for 15 years already, people here still don't recognize my dialect as Swiss German. They always think that I'm from Liechtenstein or something like that. And the reason why I chose a university in Switzerland was because it was actually closer for me than to go to Vienna or Innsbruck, which would be the closest university cities in Austria. And yeah, in 2006 I moved, as an 18-year-old, I moved from Austria to Switzerland to study in university, to study chemistry. So that was it with the questions and answers. Thank you very much. I actually had quite some fun answering those, and I hope you had fun with this episode. I hope you have a lot of fun with all your needs. I hope you keep your head above the water with everything that is going on, and I see you in the next video. Bye!